we'll go ahead and start the conversation. Starting now, and I want to thank you for being here and thank Trina and her team for putting out this spread so that you have a snack between church and lunch. This conversation will have two parts. The first part is a conversation with Bob about his plans to retire. And that part of the conversation will begin with some questions that we've been hearing bubbling up this week. And there are some representative members of the congregation who are going to ask a few questions. And then as we have time, we'll take more questions. We have some index cards up here at the stage and back in the back on the table. So if you have a question that you don't get to today, please do write it down and leave it for us to look at and come back to about later. That's the first part of today's meeting. And the second part is going to be the beginning of a conversation about the phases we'll move through as Bob retires and move to a transition period. So Diane will present some slides during that second part of the morning or afternoon. Okay, I'll turn it over.
Hi, I'm Claire Curtis, and I've been at Millwood for about 8 years now. So, Dr. Bob, after you retire, do you plan to move away from Winston-Salem? And will we still get to see you at church and around the community?
Well, there's my answer to that question, and there's Mandy's answer to that question. And as you know, she usually wins those conversations. I have no desire to move. I have no plans to move. Hang on, I'll say more. I love it here. I love this part of the state. I love North Carolina. I love you all. This is where our support system is, medically, emotionally, every other way, friendships. Bambi's determined we're going to move to Northern Virginia so she can love on those grand boys. And my plan is to take her up there as much as she needs so I can keep living here. We certainly have no plans to immediately move. I haven't had time to even think about it. So the first plan is just to get done and crash and take some time to do nothing for a change. And then we'll start paying attention to what emerges. As for me being seen around here, that will not be the case for a good long while. It's a best practice when ministers or other staff members leave to really lead, to give the congregation and the new persons a chance to connect and grow into a meaningful graft with the congregation and a relationship. When staff members do not take time away from the congregation when they resign, it usually doesn't end well. In my experience, they tend to have a hard time letting go and supporting their successor. So I will be out of the mix for a good long while. I would love to see the day come where their new pastor is here and she or he is thriving and you love them better than you love anybody before them, and I can quietly re-engage if he or she says that it's okay with them. When I came, Dr. Jack was still here, the family pastor, and he was an enormous help to me. And I'm just deeply grateful I got to know him. And he never tried to tell me what to do, he just was my most fiercest supporter. When Diane resigned from our staff, where's Diane? As our Minister of Spiritual Formation and Adult Education, she and Rick took several months, maybe a year, and then very gingerly started re-engaging. So as usual, Diane is my model, and if I come back, I'll hope to do it as well as she did. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Forrest Cosby. My wife Corinne and I have been coming to Millwood with our 3 kids since 2010. And Bob, you addressed some of this in your sermon this morning, but what made you decide this was the right time to retire? Why now?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad you all came to Millwood in 2010 because you've been a huge part of what's made it special for us. We got here in 2011 and knowing that the Cosbys were here and their beautiful children grow up here and now are sitting in our youth choir. It's made it very special for me. Why did I choose now to retire? Well, I turned 68 in September, and I've seen far too many ministers try to hang on until it was way too long. I wanted to go while you wanted me to stay, not stay until you wanted me to go. Someone on the search committee reminded me that when I was talking with the committee I was about to turn 55, and they asked me how long did I think I had to give them. And I said, well, I think there's still some tread on the tires. I think I'm good for another 10 years. I might make it to 68, but I'll not be your pastor at 70. Well, I didn't remember that, but apparently it was said, and it has proven true. I'll also say that after Bambi sharing me with churches for the last 40 years, it's about time we got to make each other our priority. And, Garrison Keeler at one point gave up very home companion. I think he subsequently went back. Someone asked him why he did that. He said he got tired of living in a world without weekends. And I don't think most of you can understand, for the staff and ministers, not having weekends except as personal leave or vacation is really challenging, because it makes it impossible for you to do a lot of the things that you would want to do and when others are available to do. So I'm looking forward to having that time to be with Bambi, to visit our grandsons up in Northern Virginia, and just to figure it out as we go. And the last reason for us is because Norwood's at such a fantastic place. I mean, it's strong, it's thriving, it's got a remarkable staff, best staff I've ever seen or had anywhere. Got through that, we're back on our feet, we have new staff members, I just feel it's a good time.
Hi, I'm Marissa Joyce. Our family of 5 joined Knollwood in 2019, so we've been here a minute. And I know, as a mom, that 90 days feels like a long time, but goes really fast. Not to mention we've got a national election, 2 major holidays, and Advent all in the mix. So my question is, what do you hope for this final time together personally, and how can we as a congregation make this time as meaningful for you and for Bambi as we can?
First of all, you and Daniel and the children were another amazing addition to this church. It strengthened us in so many ways. We're grateful. I would just say 90 days seems like a long time, and it seems like too long or not enough, depending on who you are. Some of you would like to just say, okay, thanks, beat it. Some of you would rather it go on for 6 months or just not go on at all. I think 90 days is enough time for people to kind of absorb the shock and us to begin to model the new way of being in the church. It gives us time to celebrate together and reminisce, and to be honest about our feelings of what has gone well for you here and what you look forward to going forward. So I just think 90 days is about right for where we're going, and I'm looking forward to sharing with the congregation. As far as making it more meaningful, I don't think anybody needs to do anything. You don't need to be anybody other than you. My God, it's Knollwood. Trust and love these people. Be yourself. Let's be honest with one another. That's the way we've always done it. Don't try to perform. Don't try to please. Just try to follow Jesus and let me in on the fun. That's about all I would say about that. I did want to mention one other thing. I know I've got to finish up here quickly. The other thing I'd like to do in this 90 days, and I'm so thankful to Spence and Diane and Cliff and John Bowman, who's coming back from Italy on Tuesday, Chair and Vice Chair of Personnel, Chair and Vice Chair of Deacons. We've been working on a transition plan. My number one goal in that transition plan is to position Knollwood for a bright future as seamlessly as possible and to protect our staff. I don't want people expecting our ministerial staff to absorb everything I've been doing and do their day jobs. They can't do that. It's not sustainable. It's not fair to them. So I'm really counting on our transition team to come up with a short-term staffing plan effective February 1 until we get an interim, and then there'll be some adjustments. But that's really important work. Years ago, I had a family therapist, rabbi, who was a mentor supervisor of mine, and he was teaching me about congregations as family systems. And the big no-no in family systems is secrets. They tend to be toxic and dangerous and damaging. And so Rabbi Friedman said to us clergy, we were all Protestants, he said, so I don't get why when you all are thinking about resigning, you keep it a secret, and then you just surprise everybody. Well, I took that to heart, and in Macon, as I'm here, early in my process, I took a couple of trusted advisors into my process. And if it weren't for them, I probably would have done this too soon. But they were my dear friend Cliff Pennell, because he knows Knollwood like no one else, and he's a strategic thinker. And Bill Leathers, who is someone who has retired well and continues to be a spiritual friend and guide to many of us, including me. We've been talking since the spring, trying to sort out not just what's best for me, but what's best for Knollwood. And we decided in September it was time to broaden the circle, and we brought Diane and Spence and John and Cliff into a planning team, informal, just my kitchen cabinet at that point, but to begin thinking about the transition so that we could go to the DEC a couple of weeks ago and tell them what we're thinking, which they blessed, and you'll hear more about that plan shortly. So I think the fact that we're at a good place with the transition already is a huge plus, but the 90 days will be well spent getting that plan in place.
Hi, I'm Andrew Ebert. I've been involved with Knollwood since I was born, so it's over 16 years now. So my question is, Dr. Bob, would you tell us a few specific things that you're looking forward to in retirement? And what will you do that you don't get to do now or don't get to do enough?
Andrew, I can't believe you've gotten to be this tall young man in my 13 years here, and I love hearing you play that cello. What was the question again? I was so taken with you, I forgot.
Well, I got to technically. So just tell us a few specific things.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'll just say that I haven't had time to do much in the way of avocations. I have a lake behind my yard. I rarely take time to fish. I'm not complaining. I have absolutely no regrets about my ministry, none. And I'm grateful for the time I've shared with this church and others along the way. But I am looking forward to having the bandwidth to do things like fishing, picking up astronomy again. I've got a telescope that's been gathering dust for 30 years. Traveling to see the grandkids and generally doing kind of whatever we want.
Just retirement stuff, anyways.
Well, someone told me recently here at the church that retirement is like the Grand Canyon. It's one of the few experiences that actually lives up to its billing, and I'm hoping that will be true.
Alright. Well, thank you for your leadership and connections to people I know. I sincerely wish joy and just relaxation for you and your wife as you transition to this phase of life. Thank you,
Andrew. And I can still listen in on live stream to hear you play that cello.
Good afternoon. I am Len Pressler. Jody and I have been members here almost 25 years now. A great pleasure and honor. One of my great memories here, part of leadership, like all of you, was to be part of and lead the interim process at Pretty Roger Underwood to help us redefine our identity as a church and then facilitate the process of attracting and recruited Bob. Apparently a little pull from Tim Pennell and a little push from Bambi. We appreciate that.
And North Carolina barbecue and Krispy Kreme donuts.
Oh, yeah. She did. So I wonder, Bob, among the many, you mentioned in your sermon this morning some of your accomplishments, but among those and others, perhaps what are among the most memorable and meaningful for you personally, and why?
We don't have that kind of time, Lynn. I do want to thank you for your leadership. You and Jody and your friends to be in Bambi. And I wasn't here for the interim, but I was here during the pandemic when you chaired the deacons and got us through a really tough time. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I'll just say that Noah truly is. I did speak to a few things. If you were not paying attention, go watch the video. But what I remember most about Noah is not accomplishments. It's just the enormous energy and satisfaction and joy that I felt to be a part of this remarkable congregation. I mean, Noah really is special. I've never been in a church I didn't love. I've never been in a church that I wanted to lead. I thought it would take me a year to get my heart in the right place with Noah. I was madly in love in about 2 weeks. And that has never changed. I know more about Noah than anybody in this room, I suspect. And I can just tell you, the more you know about Noah, the more you love her. And that's not true of most families, and that's not true of most churches. But that's been my experience here. Noah has a Jesus-centered compassion and kindness and openness to the Spirit to try and do new things with good process and good feedback, but boldness. And it's not an accomplishment, it's just the privilege of the journey that I'm really celebrating. Thank you.
We love and appreciate you, and God willing and family willing, we look forward to your return.
That'd be great. But you know, Jesus said he was coming back. He hadn't made it yet. But that's one way I don't intend to follow Jesus. I want to come back if and when I can.
My name is Janet Ray, and although I don't feel like it, I've been here almost 40 years.
Not that old.
I'm here. So, Bob, with my question, if you need to take time to think about it, we understand. We will take that time. But so, a weighty one for you. In 90 days, we'll be back in this space having a party. What special treat do you and Babby want for us to have?
You mean while y'all are here or after you're gone? I don't need a special treat, but I will say if Trina wants to make 7-layer cookies and wedding cookies, I'll be very happy. And Mandy loves red velvet cake. Thank you. I think I need to turn this over to Cliff so we can move along to the next stage of our program. I think that you're going to have a way to invite questions.
We might have time for one or two more quick questions for Bob. If somebody wants to come up and introduce themselves and ask them, if not, we will move into the what's next part of the presentation. Larry. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diane to come up and lead us through the discussion on look at what's ahead.
Last Sunday in worship and in a letter Sunday afternoon, you heard Bob's initial announcement, then a sermon, and now the beginnings of dialogue that continue over the next 90 days. On Monday, most of you will have received a letter from Spence, from John Bowie, from Cliff, and from me, giving some first decisions and directions for what comes in the path ahead for Knollwood. And so the next part is to elaborate on that first communication. Some of the initial decisions we mentioned in the letter that went to the congregation are that Knollwood will approach the time between pastors as an intentional transitional period, and that the DEC, the Deacon Executive Council, authorized the formation of a bridge team to ensure that on February 1st, the congregation has the essential leadership to continue flourishing. So let's take a few minutes and deepen and amplify what was meant by those decisions and put it in the context of this time between pastors. So we will be in an interim period in a church, the time between pastors, not a time when the church lags or sags or flounders. The time between pastors when other ministers, lay leaders in the congregation, keep the church flourishing until the next pastor is called. So Bob decided we're gonna be in an in-between time. That was his call to start that happening. We have decided it will be an intentional process. So an intentional transition, sometimes called an intentional interim, involves reflection and dialogue about the church's heritage, its mission, its leadership, patterns of leadership, experiences of leadership, its connections externally, and its future. So we will, as a congregation, actively, in broadly dialogical and participatory ways, take time to explore who we are and where we're going. Having dialogue and reflection will slow things down some. So why do it? When do we search for a new pastor? The search for a new pastor starts after a period of congregational reflection and dialogue and is informed by it. Why take the more reflective path? Strong evidence shows that churches that engage in intentional transition work pave the way to a better pastor search and a more successful call and ministry for their next pastor. This is empirically based by centers that devote their work to supporting churches, particularly in periods of transition. So, if we've got this period between pastors and it's not gonna be a minute, who does the work in the meantime in an intentional transition? Well, there are two models and then variations on the models, and no one has had time or dialogue or reflection to decide which model will be right for Knollwood. One model is to find for the in-between time an intentional interim minister who is both experienced in pastoral leadership and has gone through careful training, typically from one of the centers that were up on the last slide, in how to guide the congregation in the transitional work of self-reflection. Or we could find a traditional interim minister who's experienced in pastoral leadership, plus a consultant to guide the intentional interim process. No one has made this decision. We're just mapping possibilities for the way forward. And there are ways to vary these models as well. But in any model, two things are typically true. An interim minister in an intentional process may not become a candidate in the pastor search. That is a typical understanding, and it means you get somebody who really cares about churches in transition and the particular dynamics and questions of identity that emerge then. And typically, it's preferable to have that interim minister come from outside. We have people in our congregation who have been through the training to be intentional interims, who have done it successfully for other congregations, and who are also experienced pastors themselves. Typically, it's preferable to bring fresh eyes, fresh questions, no predetermined conclusions to the process. That's what's typical. Nobody's decided what we'll do. It's going to look like some combination of these elements. So we'll go through some phases. And here's the 4 words you can these are hooks to hang the explanations on, right? We're going to be bridging from now to the time after Bob. And the first phase, we're going to go through that period of reflection, conduct a pastor search, and call and support a new minister. So the bridge period, that's from November, but really it's now, until maybe late February, maybe March, maybe April, I don't know. I'm going to stop putting months on the slide pretty soon. But from Bob's closing months to the first part of the transition period. So we really are going to have a party. We're going to plan a celebration, and some of the really lovely way that members of our congregation ask questions that lots of people have been asking pointed to, we still got time. What do we want this time to hold? But before February comes, you're gonna know who's preaching in February, all right? So we know who will be in the pulpit, but more than that, that's not all God does, you probably know that. Bridge plans are in place for the pastor's roles, the pulpit, the other pastoral ministry, the staff leadership, and to put in other words, something we're gonna say more than once, other ministers are not expected to fill gaps. We're not taking Bob's job, splitting it up, and saying, oh, do this too. And Knollwood flourishes. We keep flourishing at every phase. Phase 2 is that period of congregational reflection and dialogue. Maybe late February, maybe March, maybe April to see the months disappearing, as long as it takes. The bridge plan transitions to an interim minister sometime when that person is identified and is available for us. A transition study team, maybe we'll call it something else, but that's what we called it last time we were in an intentional interim, guides the congregation in explorations of heritage, mission, leadership, connections, and future. In this period, we will form a pastor search committee. And I'll talk about how that committee will be formed according to our bylaws. But initially, the pastor search committee will focus on relationships among themselves and training for the job that they will be doing. And can we just read aloud? It's too much of a monologue. Can you read the last lines of the slide? Then we go into phase 3, and see, we don't have months. It's from when we're ready to as long as it takes. I'm liking this reading in unison. I need that line together too. When do we do this? When we're ready, as long as it takes. You got it. As the transition study team concludes and presents its findings, the pastor search committee begins its work in earnest, creating a pastor profile, which needs to be informed by the work of the congregation. Initiating a search, culminating in the call of Knollwood's next pastor. Through that period, interim ministerial leadership continues and, in unison, Knollwood flourishes. Thank you. And then we get to call a new pastor and to support that person. So the congregation calls a new pastor, an appropriate support team is in place for Knollwood's pastor, and the line does not get old. How long will it take? As long as it takes. But it's good to know what can be typical. Less than 9 months would be unusual. It could happen, I'm not ruling it out, but it would be unusual for a church to go through a reflective process and a patient pastor search. And many congregations take approximately 18 months. So those are just kind of benchmarks to set our expectations and prepare. Last time we took 2.5 years. Nobody thinks 2.5 years this time. So we'll talk about leadership. We've talked about the interim minister, but who leads before and alongside the interim minister before we have a called long-term pastor for Knollwood? I'm not going to read aloud. Run your eyes over this chart and put names and call faces to mind. And then would these gifted people, we've got a lot of people standing, would these gifted people please either stand or put your hand up? We are so blessed. Turn around and remind yourself how blessed we are. They're what gives credibility to those two words, Knollwood flourishes. But so are you. These folks aren't in the room today, but we have an exceptionally strong administrative staff as well. So you can put names to some of these roles. They're not in this room for us to applaud, but next time you talk to somebody on the phone, or you're in the church office, or you're receiving and replying to an email, tell them you're grateful for them and thinking of them. We'll experience the transition intermittently. These folks are going to experience it somewhere between 25 and 55 hours a week, right? And we're grateful for how they will keep us flourishing. How many of you have been in a church in a period between pastors? Will you raise your hands? Yeah. And keep them up for a minute, but just lower them if that was not a church, like a Baptist church or another church that has congregational governance. Or to put it positively, keep your hand up if you've been through an interim period in a church with congregational governance. It's a lot. Look around. We've done this before, okay? So who does what when in terms of congregational governance? According to our bylaws, the Deacon Executive Council oversees and provides guidance throughout the transition. The DEC will authorize the special teams that directly undertake specific tasks. And the chair, Spence O'Neill, tell her how grateful you are for her too, convenes the pastor search committee when that body launches. The personnel committee, according to our bylaws, has specific jobs. The personnel committee will hire the interim minister, will directly in employment-related ways support our staff, which we all will do. The personnel committee has particular responsibilities for supporting staff. And at the right time, we'll negotiate with and hire the new pastor called by the church. The Nominating and Leadership Development Committee has a particular task. They will populate the pastor search committee, guided by the bylaws. So our bylaws say the pastor search committee will have 12 members. 4 people serve in virtue of their office. The chair of the DEC at the time the search committee is formed, so that'll be this church year. The chair of personnel, John Gomey, the chair of finance, and the chair of MAC are invited to serve in virtue of their leadership positions in the congregation. And then there are 8 members chosen at large, and the process for that choice will be publicized so that you could be nominating, you could be thinking. The search committee itself then chooses its chair and vice chair, or might choose to have co-chairs once it's formed. The diaconate strengthens congregational care during the interim, receives information and provides guidance and perspective to the DEC, and deacons may be tapped to serve on some of the interim teams. So it's a broadly distributed honeycomb of lay leadership. The Deacon Executive Council is a pivotal group in the center. The top 3 groups here that I've named are existing standing populated leadership bodies in the church. The bottom 3 will belong to this transition and be appointed to do specific tasks during the transition. So that you again feel the credibility of our saying Knollwood flourishes, may I ask all present members of the Deacon Executive Council to stand. May I ask all present members of the nominating committee to stand. All of you who are on the personnel committee to stand. All deacons who are present, would you please stand? We've got a great team of lay leaders to make congregational governance work well in this period. So what can you do now? Some of you who got to sit, you will not get to sit. You will be on some of those other special teams, I feel sure, and we will all be involved in the reflective dialogical work that lies ahead. But what can you do now? Pray. That is a one-word sentence, full stop. Pray. Do what you parents are telling your children to do all the time, feel your feelings, right? Acknowledge uncertainty, acknowledge sadness, acknowledge hope, acknowledge excitement. All the feelings are valid. There are inappropriate ways to express feelings, but there are no inappropriate feelings, okay? Plan to get involved in the open-ended process ahead. Express gratitude for our ministers and administrative staff who will continue to fulfill their own roles in gifted, spirit-led ways. Know this, the people who are familiar with church landscapes are confident we will attract many candidates who want to be Knollwood's next pastor. We'll have one spirit-led choice, but we will have many people who are attracted to this congregation. That's not just my hope, that is the advice of experienced consultants. And there are ways we can all help make the last period of Bob's Knollwood ministry meaningful, appreciative, and celebratory. He can say, don't do anything special, you'll think of things. And then pray. And I wanted you to see the text of that third DEC decision. And we're just going to read in unison before we go to a Q&A period. So, together with me, we hereby resolve to hold a grand celebration in January to honor officers 13 years of faithful, fruitful service to Knollwood Baptist Church and ancestors' contributions as a love I'd like to ask Cliff and Spence if they would come. And we do have some time for questions and answers. If you would come to the microphone, that would help the recording so that things are audible to others. If you're really not comfortable coming forward, you can ask your question from your seat. One of us will repeat it so everyone hears it, and then take questions as we can. Cliff, Spence?
Thank you, Diane. And aren't we so lucky that Diane is here? Oh, great. Are there questions you can think of now, right away? And if you know you're gonna have questions but you don't yet, this is the first of many, many, many conversations we'll be having. So it's okay. You can sense that you have a question but you don't have one to raise your hand for yet. But yes.
Our last intentional was Roger Underwood. He couldn't become called to be our pastor, so he just joined us. So we got Bob and Roger.
That worked out really well.
It may be premature to ask the question, but in my view, no small part due to Bob's leadership, Knollwood is in a substantially better place than we were before Bob came. In part reflecting your observation that this would take us long, probably this time. But I'm curious whether there was a reason to go through the full intentional process as thinking back to all the things that we addressed in the last one. Is there some aspect of who we are that causes us to believe that, or is it just that is the preferred model?
Well, I'd like to start answering, I'll defer to you, but I would say two things come to my mind. One is that evidence that Diane mentioned, that churches do have a better chance of having a good flourishing, having a good next pastor in place if they go through that intentional process. And also, we've changed a lot since the time that we did this before. My family, for example, joined more recently than when Bob came. And there are many of us who are Knollwood who are also new to being Baptist and new to congregational governance and don't have the experience of that reflection and figuring out who we are, what we want, where we're going. So it'll be good for us as a congregation to experience that together, even though many of you have been through that process before, but to bring us into it, we're new to it.
I think that nailed it. I would just add that that's one of the reasons that there's consideration for a hybrid model, for lack of a way of saying it, that you get the outside expertise to help guide you through the process as we did last time, and it worked so well. But it also allows us the flexibility to maybe look at doing that differently, because we are in a different place. We do have a lot of folks here who had not been on that journey from 13, 14 years ago.
So 13 years means that a number of us have youth who were tiny when you and Bambi came, Bob. So Emma Gibson was the first baby you dedicated after being called, and she is now 13 going on 14. So as a parent of youth, recognizing that we have not yet called a minister to youth, I'm very curious about how that process and the timeline for that process now overlaps with the hiring, or rather the transition process for the next fall.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand it to Bob. Why are you giving it to me?
Corinne, I'll just say there's no more important business right now than securing the next minister of youth and families for this church. There's not any thought of slowing things down. It's more important than ever. I mean, that's one place we'll get some staff bandwidth to help manage the pastoral and other demands of the church. So we're on a positive path. Corinne has led us ably. I'll let her give you an update, but I'll just assure you that's job one in terms of what we're trying to accomplish.
So when Bob pulled me aside and told me about his pending retirement, and then explained to the search committee, as we met the Sunday before he announced to the church, one thing was clear among all of us sitting around the table, that it did not stop the work at all that we were doing, that if anything, the work became more important. We are in a really great spot in our process, and we are very hopeful. And so our hope is that very soon we will have more information to share. Just know that our entire committee remains incredibly hopeful, incredibly grateful for Bob's support in this process and bringing us into what's going on. But nothing particularly slows us down with this. I think it's more important ever than to have a youth minister in place as soon as we can, and as soon as it's the right person. We've not been anxious just to fill the job, because one, we've also had excellent leadership from Evan Segas as our interim. So Evan has been instructed to help us with them. He has stayed on longer than we anticipated as we waited for as long as it takes to find the right person. I look at the rest of our staff, and this person is joining a great team, and it is, they will be lucky to be part of that, and our work continues.
I'll also say that one of my hardest sharing of my news was the search committee, because I was concerned about how it might impact the process. But with this creative, thoughtful group, we came up with a plan. And in a conversation with a very promising candidate, as expected, because of this committee's skill, the news of my retirement didn't change anything. Now, there are churches where the church would just say, wait, we got to get a new pastor before we hire anybody. That's not the kind of person Nolan wants. It's not the kind of person Nolan would call. I would just say anybody that we're going to be talking to will know about the transition and will see it as a great opportunity to help shape the church's future versus a time for someone to be holding their head.
Are there other questions right now? We'll give time for one. Okay. Well, as you have questions, we'll keep talking. Thank you again for being here and for starting this conversation with us. Please be listening out for that slide about who does what. You will be doing things. We'll be asking you to be part of this. Please be listening out for that. Go in peace.